What's good, everyone? This is Dr. Nee. It's another episode of Docs Outside the Box. Listen, we've got Molly Bell. She is a provider recruiter at Provider Solutions and Development. That is the organization that we're teaming up with for sponsorship, but also with a way to guide you all as listeners on the proper ways and the most ways with leverage I want to use that you can find yourself the job that you need, the job that you deserve. So Molly Bell, welcome to Docs Outside the Box. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so listen, there's a lot we can talk about. We can talk about how to find the right job. We can talk about how to negotiate the right salary. But today we're going to talk about the income pay gap that unfortunately still exists between women and men.
Correct.
And you actually wrote an article or a series on PSND, Providing Solution and Development's website, on how we can, or at least women providers can really start the game off on the right foot, which is negotiating for themselves and so forth. So I got some statistics here. Give me 1 second. So there's a couple of studies. There's a study that was written by Health Affairs. This came out December of 2021. And it says that female physicians earn an estimated $2 million less than male physicians over a simulated 40-year career. You guys
That
can
is
check.
insane.
That's crazy. You guys can check that out on Health Affairs. I didn't make that up, so don't come after me in these
I
streets.
didn't make it up either.
Right. We didn't make that up. So it's in the streets. It's in the show notes. You can go check that out. It's Health Affairs. It was volume 40, number 12, Hospitals, Workforce, Equity, and More. You can go and check that out. If you check out Medscape, and I know everybody here watches or listens or reads something from Medscape, in their article that talks about physician incomes begin to recover from the pandemic, it's a survey. There's our portion where they talk about how the gender pay gap still exists between men and women, obviously, which is a major issue. But they found that in Medscape's 2012 survey, male primary care providers earn 23% more than their female counterparts. In 2021, men edged slightly more ahead, earning 25% more than women. So think about that. In 2012, male primary care providers earn 23% more than their female counterparts. 9 years later, it's 2% worse, y'all. So we got an issue, right? And so, you think about it, Title IX is coming up. Major issues with Title IX, major legislation with Title IX is coming up during these next several months. So it's really interesting how Title IX works out and what it did with federally mandated programs that helped women, particularly in sports, women particularly in the workforce, how that plays into what's going on right now and what we see with the pay gap. And then there was another study, but I can't find it right now. Who cares? But anyway, let's talk about this.
Yes.
Let's jump into this, because I think that oftentimes we have to talk about what's going on. I think we know what's going on. But for me, I kind of see this as there's like this type of unspoken reason why women get paid less than men. Do you know why? I have my thoughts, so I'll let you go first.
Well, that's a great question, and I'm excited to hear your thoughts, but ultimately I think, and I don't know how to say, I'm going to just go ahead and say it, but I think sometimes as women, we get put in a box of being scared to ask for things because we just have been ingrained that we should feel lucky to be in the room. And I think it just perpetuates. And I think sometimes it's just easier for men to come to the table and ask for what they want, which is great. But I don't always feel like women always feel the same way. So I think just right off the bat, those are my first thoughts. But what do you think?
I think that there is some type of unspoken notion. Obviously this is not real. There's an unspoken notion. There's an unspoken thought among people who make decisions when it comes to who gets paid more than others, that women are not motivated by money. I think that's what it is.
That's a great point.
I don't think it's real. I don't think it makes sense. I just think that the people who make decisions are like, oh, well, she's not motivated by money. Let's do X, Y, and Z. Or if someone who comes very assertive to them, they're more willing to give them what they ask for. But for a woman, I think they find that, well, if we offer some type of pushback possibly, or if we make it very difficult, or like you said, you have someone coming in with hat in hand, the employee or whoever is in charge feels like they can offer less because they feel like the employee or the woman, physician or provider is already thinking that they need less anyway.
Do you
I'm
feel
not.
like there's still the breadwinner as far as males being the breadwinner? So there's that notion there too.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's there. And I think that obviously, I think for several years now, more women are matriculated in college. More women, I think, are equal in
Hmm.
terms of medical school. It's equal or it's a little bit more on women's side. So obviously, in this situation, women are way more aggressive in studying sciences, mathematics, and obviously in medicine. So a lot of those notions should be dispelled at this point, but they still persist, which lets you know what's really going on here. Who is trying to protect this, and what does that mean? And I put who in quotes, but the most important thing is that this pay gender gap still exists, and it's unfortunate. So let's jump into it. So when you are talking, when a doctor calls you,
Yep.
a really badass woman physician calls you,
My
what's the
favorite.
process? What's the process
Yeah.
that you take them through?
Yeah, absolutely. So in my role, I really am the liaison. So I'm the first contact when you are looking for a position. I currently recruit in Portland. So you're looking for a hospitalist job in Portland, I'm your girl. They just shameless plug. Um,
It's okay. You could toot your own horn here. It's okay.
but I help them through the interview process, and I'm always happy to look over CVs for any, just any feedback I can have or provide. That's what I do all day long. But really, when it comes down to the contract negotiation piece, I work very closely with the medical directors and the partners that are in the hiring group. So I feel like I'm the liaison between both, both the physician and the group. So really, just when it comes down to the negotiation piece and the contract piece, the group I work for, the hospital system I work for right now, it's very not gender. I would say, I guess, just backing up, they have a very set rate. So there's not a ton of salary negotiation, if any at all. So that makes it very easy as far as making sure that everyone's being equally paid. But really, there's other options too. Like when I have a provider that wants maybe a lower FTE or a higher sign-on bonus when they start, bringing in that to the group and just bringing, the reasons why and looking at what we can do. And that's my role, is I make sure that all the requests that are being asked, I'm bringing it to the group and making sure that, just seeing what we can do and just being that support system throughout and being that cheerleader. Because I always say, just ask. There's no hurt in ever asking.
Well, let's focus on salary, because I know you say
Yeah.
a lot of facilities, particularly larger facilities,
Uh-huh.
have like these standard contracts
Yep.
and have these standard, I'd say pay scales, or at least pay ranges, so to
Yes,
speak,
exactly.
however small they may be.
Mhm.
Do you think that like we should be looking at these salaries more like how we look at car prices and their sticker prices, like MSRP? Right? Like this is the suggested salary, or is it like hard on, like you can't go from there? Because I've always been told that human resources has to always offer a range. That's never just
Yes.
like one number, right?
Well,
For your salary.
yeah. And it can really depend on the specialty as far as, years of experience being in play with that. But for example, the hospitalist group I work with right now, it is the straight salary that everybody across the board, no matter how many years of experience, everyone's making that rate. Of course, there's production bonuses that go in that as well. So it can always, fluctuate just with how much you're working and all of that good stuff. But from my perspective and my experience, I think that it keeps things level. It keeps things from getting out of control, that 10 years down the road, you're realizing you're making $50,000, $20,000 less than your counterparts due to just those ranges.
Yeah, it catches up quickly, y'all. So according to like some of these articles, like it really, where you want to jump in is really at the salary point. And I agree with you. The other, I guess, fringe benefits are important also. But what these articles say is if you don't negotiate for what you really want, or if you're unaware that there's range, there's room to kind of negotiate, what these studies show is that even though your salary will increase over time, that gender pay gap still kind of exists. As your salary goes up, the gap between you and a man may stay the same or may increase as that person, as that male is is pushed, as they're climbing the ladder also. So, I also think that another notion also is, and this is more, I think, a little bit more chauvinistic, I think, obviously, and more paternalistic in how we look about things. But I think that there are also people who try to justify a lower salary or try to justify the pay gap as just saying that, women get pregnant more, possibly. They take more sick leave. They take more just leave in general. So I think that what are things that women can do, or if you can think of things that women can do to proactively combat these like unspoken excuses to keep a gender pay gap going on?
I think that's fighting words as far as, what we can do. But I think, and what I really push anybody I'm working with, residents, experienced candidates, it doesn't matter. I feel like the negotiation part can be very intimidating. It is just, for me, coming down to always ask. It never hurts to ask. And do not, if you're already to the point where you've been offered a contract, I mean, in extreme circumstances, maybe they'll revoke it, for what, X, Y, and Z. But as far as when it comes to negotiations, they're not gonna take away your contract or your offer because you asked for something. So I think just continuing to push and ask for what your needs are. And the worst that can happen is that you'll be told no.
Yeah, I think that residency is a very abnormal experience.
Oh, yeah.
Medical school and residency is a very abnormal experience. Their entire time in medical school, you feel like you could be replaced. In residency, you definitely feel like you just got in. Luckily, this computer system happened and there was like a glitch in the system in the matrix and you just happen to match at your program and you just feel like there's always people knocking at your door. At least that's how I felt.
Yeah.
I kind of feel like people still feel the same way. And I think when it's time to become an attending, those, I guess like trauma, imposter syndrome, the feeling that you can be replaced, that's really hard as hell to like get past. And I think it becomes really hard to feel like you're in the driver's seat when you spent the last either 5 years, maybe even more, 8 years, feeling like, hey, this can change, this is unstable, and I really don't feel like I have leverage. And we're telling you guys, like, you have the leverage right now.
Yep.
So I agree with you, Molly. Like, if the salary is not negotiable, then there's other things that are negotiable. And the most important thing is you just got to ask. Like, if you want to advocate for your patients, right? How many times do you see that you need to advocate for your patients? And there are things that, you see that may not be in a textbook, or there's things that you see may not be happening that should be happening. You have to speak up. It's the same thing that has to happen with your own contract. Yeah, absolutely.
100%.
Absolutely.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. It's wild too. I mean, especially like you said, coming out of residency too, it's the first, I mean, of course you're applying for things along the way, but this is your first, situation of negotiation and, a large salary and all that good stuff. I think it is critical, and not to, change gears really in this conversation, but I think just making sure early on in your residency, making sure your CV is exactly how you want it, and just getting all your ducks in a row in that situation, and feeling empowered. The job market is hot right now as far as openings go, and what the demand for physicians is right now, and feel empowered about that. I think that's a huge factor too.
Yeah. So I guess as we're recovering from COVID, hospitals are hiring a big time again, and there's a huge amount of shortages. I think a significant amount of people, doctors who were kind of leaning towards retirement, they weren't there yet, but they were leaning towards retirement, were like, man, deuces, I'm out. And they retired. So now the shortage, the physician shortage is worse than before, folks. So y'all need to use this to your advantage. It's interesting.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, okay. So I know you mentioned that salary, we may not necessarily look at it like how we look at a car sticker, right? You may not be able to have a significant amount of leeway changing things there. But I think a lot of people really don't think that they can negotiate how much of an FTE there is. Can you explain FTE, how that works? What's 1, 0.5? Take us through all that.
Absolutely. So 1.0 FTEs full time, typically, I mean, you can think about, 5 days a week, or doing 410s, or I'm sure that doesn't actually, with how much you guys work, it doesn't actually acute to that.
More like 7 days a week. Yeah.
That's a 1.0. So yeah, full time. And then, as you go down to a 0.8, or a 0.5. I mean, really the biggest difference is, of course, what your wages are, but also maybe your benefits might look a little bit different or things like that. But your hours will drastically decrease too. And that's a huge thing too. And I think what really with the pandemic, what we've realized too, is that family is very important, and maybe work life is looking different for you now these days and what you're looking for as far as your career goes. So for example, I just helped hire a provider, a physician who has small children, and really it had nothing to do, I mean, of course, salary, but she really was like, I just want to focus on my family as well. And, we worked with the team and her partners, the hiring partners, and we got her down to a 0.8 FTE. And that was just something that was very important to her. And she was a great provider. And so we negotiated that process. And so I think just those are other factors too, besides salary, of just what you can bring to the table and ask if, it's just about what's important to you and what you want your work life to look like.
Yeah. So folks, what we're saying is if you are, if you take a job and it's 1 FTE, that means that's a full-time equivalent. Like you are working as how they expect a full-time employee to work. So if you get to decrease that down to 0.8, well, maybe that may relate to you maybe taking, I don't know, 3 out of 4 weekends, or I don't know how that works, but basically it's less than how a full-time employee may work. This happens all the time. This happens a lot in trauma, where you may have a trauma medical director. This trauma medical director is going to all these different meetings related to the program, and they may have in their contract that they're only going to work 0.8 of the time of call or clinical, and then the rest 0.2 is for their trauma medical position or whatever it may be. This happens with people who do research. This happens with people who may have some type of academic position where it's less than 1 FTE, and it allows them to do research. So half of their time is spent towards doing research, and maybe the other half is doing some clinical work, taking some extra call or what have you. But there is room here, y'all, where you can, take a little bit of a haircut, I guess, off of the amount of time that you're working clinically. And maybe it shows up in your salary, but also at the same time, the gains that you get from a happier life or a more balanced life. One of those things you can't quantify. And I think that's huge. I wish someone had told me about that earlier. My wife, actually, she was very adamant that her first job, she wanted to be a part-time employee. And I was like, look, man, we got like $600,000 alone. You better take that full-time money, right? Like, we need this money. But one thing that she mentioned is it's the truth, Molly, right? One of the things that I didn't think about is this was our first time being married. Obviously, we just got married, and being full-time OB is like full-time cardiology. It's like full-time neurosurgery, which is not like full-time trauma. Like full-time trauma is shift work, right? When I'm done, I'm done. Yeah, I got to go back for the emergencies, but it's not like full-time OB where you're attached to your pager. You're in clinic all day. People who are listening, you know what I'm talking about. So she thought, well, having that type of experience and also just being married, we would just be doing this, right? Like we would just be missing each other. Hi, bye, possibly, a weekend together, maybe. So she decided to go part-time. And I questioned that big time. I was like, no, we need that money. You need to go full time. But it actually ended up being the smartest decision that she made for our relationship. And also at the same time, you look back and I'm like, I didn't know that you could negotiate that you could decide, oh, well, I know you're looking for a full-time employee. I can only give you half time. You gonna take it? So now that I mentioned that, yeah, but it's true. So now that I mentioned that, since we got rid of salary, and then we also are talking about clinical time, which relates to being a full-time employee, what other things do you think are negotiable?
Yeah, I mean, other things to just add that you could, telehealth's a big thing that people are asking for right now. And that's very specific. Of course, there's lots of state regulations as far as, what telehealth opportunities are. But I mean, something to ask for if that's just, what you're looking for, depending on what your specialty is.
Can we treat it like football? Like, can we treat like your contract like a football where we sign on bonuses and ask for more or something like that?
Yeah,
That's how I look at
exactly.
it.
Always ask too. I mean, sometimes too, I think you should always ask if there's student loan forgiveness options. And sometimes that's not always right on the table, but I mean, I think if it's a hard position to fill and I think that is definitely something everybody should always be asking for. You never know what might come out of that. And what options are.
I think the most recent studies show that I think anywhere between 40%, depending on which demographic area you come from, whether you're African American, Latino, or Native American, you're going to have a significant amount of that tuition being paid for by student loans. If you're white, then obviously it's a lower amount, but it's still a significant amount. I think they're saying the average amount of people graduating from medical school, including college, is about $240,000 of student loan debt. And with the physician shortage that's going on, folks, there are hospitals, there are regions, there are areas that are willing to pay for your student loan. And in my opinion, if I'm just saying this, but in my opinion, I know it may not be the company line. I don't like sign-on bonuses. I think that sign-on bonuses are golden handcuffs because in my experience, the majority of sign-on bonuses are loans.
Yep.
Right. Then they're not
back and
right that you got to pay back. So let's say you go there and you work at some place for a month or, you work someplace for a year and, your sign-on bonus says that you have to be there for 2 years or 3 years and you really hate it. You have to give that money back in most cases. So that's why for me, unless it's just like, yo, give me that money and no matter what, it's my money, then but the student loan payback, that for me is innumerable, right? Like it's student loans, you got to look at it almost like an income tax. That's how I look at it, right? It's an income tax. And if you can get someone to pay that down for you significantly in an efficient manner, I oftentimes tell people you may want to get student loan payback more so than even salary or, whatever.
Absolutely.
I push that. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Now, I remember there was a story. My wife has a story, and I was kind of there at this institution also where I knew of a woman who was a chairperson of her department. Mm-hmm. She'd been working in that department for 8 years. And then a new OB came in who was going to be under her, was making $50,000 more than she was.
And was this person new?
Well, he had less experience than her, but he came in, he wasn't like fresh grad. But
new to this system, and
oh yeah, no doubt, he was new to the system.
Putting time in,
absolutely, making $50,000 more than she was. That was a problem.
That's insane.
Yeah, it's a problem. I do think that it really does come back to some unsaid notions. I don't think they're right or wrong. Excuse me, I think they're wrong, but it's these notions are not proven. You can't. How are you going to prove that, right? Like you can't prove that a woman actually values something more than a man. Like you can't prove it. You can say it, but you can't prove it. But one thing that you can prove, one thing that I think is really interesting that I think women should use. I know some women are using it, particularly in subspecialties, because I've seen them do this. But there's multiple studies that come out and show that women actually have been proven to have better outcomes clinically than men.
Interesting.
Right? It's the truth. It's backed by data. And if you can use this information, if this information is out there, you might as well use this in part of negotiation and say, hey, listen, it's showing that like this gap that is going on, right? I have the actual statistics that show clinically there's a gap right here and that I should be getting paid more than X, Y, and Z. Right. So I think that if women understood like the value that they bring to a workplace, I think that could change things, particularly in a negotiation. You just got to be able to use it. You got to be bold enough to use it. That's my thoughts. I think
so too. I mean, that is huge and a big thing that you can bring to the table. And absolutely.
So in your experience, because you work with these residents, you work with these attendings who are looking to change and they're looking for a position.
Yeah.
All right. We talked about, obviously you can negotiate salary possibly. You can negotiate how long or how often you're working. So from a 1 FTE to maybe 0.5 FTE, that's possible. Yep. Paid vacation, possibly sign-on bonuses, things like that, telehealth, those are all negotiable. And I think you mentioned that there was a time where a job was being advertised as 1 FTE down to 0.8.
Yep.
Do you have any other examples of how you saw, like, when you were advocating for a woman, you're like, come on, step up, ask for this. Like, can you give us an example of that?
Absolutely. Well, and truly, I have had conversations where and this has happened multiple times throughout my career, but just on the phone with a provider, physician, APC, and just being like flat out saying, I'm sorry, can I ask? And I am a big proponent of always saying, please never, ever
they're asking
apologize.
They're asking you if they can ask.
Yes, exactly. And will they be mad at me if I ask, or will you be frustrated? And and it's like, oh my gosh, absolutely not. Always, again, going back to owning your power in that situation and never apologizing. But I think just looking at a situation and like you asked, I think it just is a huge, I've just been in so many situations where I get apologies and feeling sorry, feeling like they're bugging or anything like that. And it's just absolutely never the case.
So what's the most egregious thing that you've been asked for? Like, it doesn't have to even be between a man and woman. Like, what's the most thing that you're like, I can't believe you're going to ask for this and they're probably going to get it? Like, have you ever been in that type of experience?
Yeah, I have. And I probably just like a outrageous salary where or just an outrageous ask where I'm like, there's no way this is going to be approved. And then it is, and I'm blown away. But
really?
It's a situation too, where you never know what will happen if you ask. So, yeah.
So so with provider solutions development, when someone comes and works with you guys, let's say, for example, hospital likes the doctor likes the hospital, go on interview, and then a contract gets sent. Yep. Has the contract details, including salary and so forth. How long what happens next in terms of, a physician being able to say, hey, you know what, I want to start negotiating that process. Is that through you guys, or do they have to get their own lawyer? How does that work?
No, absolutely. So really before our contract's even made, we send a letter of intent that has all compensation on there. So before we even get to the contract phase, there's room for the negotiations and the asks. And really, we're very transparent to sending out sample contracts and what the contract will look like before, anything is even, so that questions are, being transparently asked the whole time. And people do often get lawyers, and which I think is smart. I think there's it's a contract with, like with anything, it's good to always have second eyes on it.
Right.
But yeah. And then, so our process is then once, everybody's decided on, what the terms will look like. We submit on our end for a contract to be drafted with those terms in there. And then it goes out. Yeah.
Okay. And then how long do you think the process of going back and forth with negotiation, how long on average? Are we talking month?
Yeah.
3 weeks?
No, time is of the essence. I think everyone's pretty aware, and partners and us and our contracting team, everyone's very Johnny on the spot with it. I think it's, credentialing timelines right now are wild. I think everywhere, as far as getting providers on board, onboarded and things like that. So I think just making sure that no one wants to delay anything. It impacts everybody when we do that. So I think just timeline wise, a week or two at the most, just depending. Sometimes if a lawyer is involved, though, it can be a little bit longer just with, reviewing and things like that.
Question for folks who've already graduated from residency. We're talking about attendings, people who hate their jobs and they're looking for something else. And they're not trying to tell nobody, don't talk to anybody in my job. I'm looking for this, right? What's in June? What kind of timeline are we looking at? Is the timeline the same looking for a job does it follow residency timelines, or is it completely different?
I think it's completely different. Really, it comes down to also what state licensure timelines are. So as far as, just depending, and especially with the pandemic, I feel like things really slowed down with processing, with the amount of licensure that was needed. So really it comes down to state licensure. If there's if there's a time, if that's being slowed down. So we're looking at 120 days. So 3 or 4 months is basically our timeline.
Y'all hear that, y'all? 3 or 4 months. Make sure you save up that much in your emergency fund before you say a big F you to your current job. Right. But we have a bunch of people who listen to the show who may be unhappy with their current position and are looking for a different position. And before they, chuck the deuces, you want to make sure that you have something saved up from an emergency fund, because it takes, like you said, that long for you probably to start looking for a job all the way to being, walking in the hospital with an ID badge that says that you're on call and you're going to start getting paid for that. So it takes a while.
Yes.
So Molly, this was great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think that it's really important for us to not only speak generally and say, hey, everyone, you can negotiate your salary, you can negotiate this and so forth. But I think it's really important for us to really talk about some serious, inequities that occur in life. And one of them being there's a huge inequity between how women get paid and how much men get paid. And as you can see, and as the studies show, over 40 years, I mean, this is $2 million possibly. And that's like probably at basic. Like when we talk about subspecialties, neurosurgery, trauma surgery, plastic surgery, I bet you that number increases dramatically. And it exists not just in medicine, obviously it exists definitely in IT and other fields. But I really appreciate you kind of diving deep with me in this situation. And I hope I didn't get you in too much trouble. But
absolutely not. But I really enjoyed this. Thank you so much for having me on.
Okay, so if folks want to get in touch with you, they're like, hey, Molly, she's dope. I want to look for my next job. I want her to help me look for my next job. How do they get in contact with you?
Absolutely. My email is molly.bell@psd. Oh my gosh.
It's all good.
psdrecruit.org.
So let's do it again. Molly Bell. Start again.
Molly.bell@psdrecruit.org.
Guys, that will be in the show notes. Make sure you check that out. Once again, Molly Bell. Over here, we're talking about the women, the gender pay gap in medicine, how it still exists, and what you can and cannot ask for. In my opinion, women, y'all need to be aware of the value you bring to a workplace, especially in comparison with men. And you got studies to prove it. Y'all need to toot your own horn, get that money. Listen, everybody, we'll catch you guys on the next episode. Peace.